welcome to Teacher Talk, the podcast for teachers who are lifers but still want to have a life. This is Jared, and as always, I'm joined by my partner, Johanna.
Hey, Johanna.
Hi, Jared.
What are we going to talk about today?
Kids who act like they know it, but they don't have a clue.
Tell me about those kids.
Well, if you give a pretest, they'll score like 50%, and then they'll think that's like 80%, and they'll refuse to kind of engage in the learning, and they'd rather dork around and not do anything, because in their mind, they're going to learn it super quick at the very end, and they're still going to get a good grade, and they don't want to act like it's hard or they need to work hard.
Even though they do?
They do.
Like they do need to work hard? Because they're not going to know it otherwise?
Well, they might be a kid who could be a lot more knowledgeable and maybe get higher scores, or over time, these tend to be kids who maybe at the secondary level used to find school very easy, and school is going to continue to get harder, and because they don't have any grit muscles, and so as the work gets harder, they're just going to quit. Like they don't have any capability to genuinely learn because maybe they've never done it.
Yeah, the way that they manifest this is by messing around.
Yes, they'll mess around.
Because it's easier to disrupt things than it is to admit that you don't know it.
No, they think they know it.
Oh, they think they know?
These are not those kids. There are kids that could have the exact same pretest scores who will like buckle down and work hard. And then there are kids who will act like they don't need to buckle down and work hard, that they already know it. That just through osmosis of being in the room, they will get the learning. And that's true. They might go from, like in the 50% range to like the C range, maybe the B range, but it will come at the cost of teacher sanity and other peers. Like the focus of the room won't be on learning. The focus of the room will be on this child who wants to be the center of attention or cause disruption by not learning.
Oh, like me.
No, you were a part of the first group. You would have been the kid that tested high and then dorked around. This is the kid who didn't test high. They tested decent. I mean, they aren't wrong. They're starting off with maybe more than average Joe, but they shouldn't be independently learning. They don't have enough knowledge to just independently get it.
They're good enough to maybe pass, and they'd rather dork around than work.
Right. They're good enough to not work hard.
And that's a drag on the entire class if you let it happen?
Yeah. If you let it happen, it will eat your time. These are probably the most time-sucking children in the classroom environment.
So, do you need to work to identify them, or is it just obvious? Because you did your assessment and then you see the behavior, or?
Well, okay, so phase one is really you have to do the assessment because these kids could...
Well, this is the first I'm hearing about this.
Yeah. Well, these kids will present themselves just like the kid who gets a high score on the pre-assessment, right? Like the behavior of the child doesn't dictate the motivation for the behavior, and that's what we have to isolate down. So
that's part of what makes the pre-assessment so important, is that the behaviors are identical.
And actually there's two other groups who could potentially have identical behaviors.
And the only way you know the difference and what to do about it is because you did the pre-assessment?
Yes, you do the pre-assessment.
All right, so I did the pre-assessment. I see the behaviors. I got them, right? We don't need to talk more about how to identify than that, or?
Nope. I kind of... maybe it's my experience, but I tend to think that this group of kid, because they demand so much attention of the teacher, even a fresh out of the gate teacher is going to be like, oh, I gotcha. If they have that pretest data.
Right.
And they've already been exposed probably since day one to the student's behavior, they will know who this kid is.
And how many do you typically have in a given class of 30?
Depends. Because I'm a content
Or let's say 20, even though that's small, because it makes the math easier.
it depends on the time of day. So if you are at a secondary school and you have music and band at a particular time of day, then that class period tends to have a lot more of these kids. And I think it's because there's a certain amount of grit required to learn an instrument.
Oh, you mean like music and band sucks them out of the classroom?
No, music and band pulls off the other kids.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
You're likely to have a higher quantity.
So if you have a class opposite band,
yes,
that's everyone that isn't like this is already self-selected out, or many of the ones that aren't like this have self-selected out.
If you have a particular foreign language at any class where really when it comes down to it, there's just a component of grit required. If it takes a large population away, you're going to have more of these students. But I don't know. And you know what? I can't tell you, because sometimes I feel like I have 8 kids like this, and then I'll have multiple classes where I feel like I have 0. And so I don't know exactly. I'm not sure there's an average.
But somewhere between 0 to half.
Yeah,
okay.
That's fair. 0 to half.
All right. So I feel like I can theoretically identify the problem. Now, what do I do about it?
You have to let them know where they are at.
Okay. Let them know where they're at. How do you do that?
Well, they need something different.
Is this like Bull Durham? Are they kids? Do you scare them? You throw
You're
bats?
desperately hoping to go back to Bull Durham references.
Most of my life is based upon Bull Durham.
No, you need to let them know where they are, not just in context of where they are at with the learning, because you're going to see like 50%. And I'm saying that number as a general truth, depending on the content, you might find that. I tend to think of it as average. My average kid on a pretest will probably get approximately a 40% to a 50%. But they think that's high.
Sure.
So they need to see where they are at in context with everybody.
Because if they know that they're in the middle or behind the middle even, that'll motivate them, or?
It will motivate them. They tend to be kids who are motivated by game-like experiences. They tend to be kids who want to be the best, and then they'll have an excuse as to why they weren't the best. And if you start them off early, realizing where they are, they'll respond to that. Now, I recommend not grouping the data by class. I instead recommend grouping the data for all of your classes and not doing like a graph where every single kid is a number, but more general than that. You don't have to be exact. This is not exact science. You can instead, real quick on a piece of paper, make a bar graph and essentially show the average score was what. You can even, if you want, just state the average score. Because if they see that their 50% is average, it does knock them down a peg. Or if they're slightly less than average, it knocks them down a peg.
Because their attitude is sort of like, this is beneath me, almost.
Right. Like, I don't need to participate in what everyone else needs because I'm better than everyone else.
I don't need to be taught this.
Yes. I'll just pull it out last minute. I maybe have had multiple learning experiences where I did pull it out last minute and it worked out for me. So why would I possibly start working hard now? I mean, there is a huge difference in between what's expected. Even if you think down at the elementary level, there's a big difference in between kindergarten and first and second and third. And kids at some point are going to reach a point where they need to start putting forth effort in order to get results. It's not just going to naturally happen.
Well, here, let's go into detail about exactly what you show them with respect to the pretest results.
I tend to recommend to the teachers that I work with that they just give a class average. And so I will say, this is where I expect you to be. I expect you to be at 40%. And look, our class average is 43%. So we're actually a little bit higher up than I thought we would be. You do have to be very careful because kids who struggle with learning, this can like decimate them, right? If they see that the class average is 43% and they're at 10%, I have tricks for how to manage that so it doesn't do that to them. But in fact, why don't I just share that now? So I tend to pre-assessment data, I don't necessarily generate out as a percentage because I think it tends to harm students. Instead, I clump them into categories. So I happen to use the standards grading practice or standards-based grading, standards reference grading of there's a beginning category, a progressing category, a meets category, an exceeds category, and then I happen to include an exceeds plus. So if a student it got 50% of the information, which in their mind means they're doing really well, like they feel good after the pretest, helping them understand that that's a progressing kind of like deflates the balloon. But a kid that's at beginning, I'll just say you're at beginning. I won't connect the dots for him, and almost
they don't need to know that they had the absolute worst pretest score in the entire grade.
Always works is to not connect their score to a grade at all. You're beginning. I expect you to be beginning. Why would we know this? I haven't taught it to you yet. Don't worry. We're working together as a team, like all that stuff.
Yeah, it wasn't your job to know it.
No, absolutely
it's your job to
not.
learn it now.
Yes. And it's just telling us where we're starting.
But a lot of these kids who refuse to learn too cool for school types are going to be progressing and not realize it.
Or beginning. I mean, quite honestly, technically, if they got a 50%, they're in the beginning category. But, I mean, a kid isn't doing that accelerated learning unless they're in the meets category. And having them understand that they're 2 deviations away from those kids, when in their mind, they're the same as those kids.
All right, so you've popped their bubble a little bit.
Popped their bubble. And you as a teacher just need to use your best judgment for when is a kid having a bubble that needs popped and when is a kid someone that, like, you're there to just feed the fire to keep them motivated to keep going.
And the behavior says a lot about that, right?
It can be tricky, but the kid that needs you to constantly feed them to keep them going is going to have a really low pre-assessment score. And so even though the behaviors are the same, they mean something different. And the kid that's got a low pre-assessment score versus a kid who has, like, okay, they just see their glass is more half full than half empty. And
right. And that's okay. Threading that needle is probably a little bit tough, but you can see why it needs to be done.
Well, you can see why you need the pre-assessment. How are you possibly going to tell the difference in between these kids if you don't have that information?
Because the glass half empty kid, you don't want to discourage.
No.
And the glass half full kid, you need to reset their expectations or they're going to fail themselves.
Yes.
And it's the exact opposite medicine for kind of the exact same problem.
The teachers often feel like it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work. It's a lot of work to do a pre-assessment. You have to do it like a week to 2 weeks in advance before the unit. You got to take time for it. It feels annoying and frustrating. You have to grade them. You have to sort your data. It's super inconvenient. And yet my behavior problems don't exist in part because of this work. And getting kids motivated to do the learning also connects to this work.
Okay. Are there any motivation strategies you need to pursue besides just letting them know that they're not as good as they thought for this type of student? Does it work? I assume it works with most to just reality check them and be like, hey, you got stuff to learn, kid. But I assume that it's not a universal, that there's some of them that are like not going to believe it, or I don't know.
Well, you can't just reality check them and then walk away. You got to reality check them and then get them right into gameplay planning. Right? This is where we get into that goal setting. So you can't just show them where they are and then be like, ha, it's you versus me, kid. I got you. Like, I knew you didn't know it. Instead, you have to be like, let's look at where we're at. Let's look at where we want to go. What are some actions that we need to do to get to where we want to go? Where do we want to see ourselves when we take the post-assessment? What does that mean we're going to need to learn every single day in order to get to that point? You know, you can, if they're 14, they really respond to very, very tactile goals.
And it's as simple as, unlike the abstract, annoying corporate action plans that I have to deal with, it's as simple as, okay, you got a 40 on your pre-assessment. What score do you want on your post-assessment? Just having them think or say out loud what they want to achieve?
Yes, and I even will use this to structure the learning for that day. So let's say, because mine tend to be performance assessments, I'll actually, in colored marker, go over the assessment and be like, look, we're learning this part. Anything that's green on these papers right now, that is what I'm teaching today. And that will help cue into the kid like, oh, I got half of those wrong. I need to pay attention today. Whether that be a formalized test or whether that be, like for me, a performance test, you can, by pointing out, this is what we're learning how to do today, it causes them to be like, oh, I need to pay attention today.
Because you already connected the dots between where they are and where they want to be, and the green things are the things that they needed to learn?
Yeah, like by being very concrete about the goal and where you're headed, it will help, even though you
and the
know...
the goal is the score, right?
They will respond. These kids will respond to this score. They don't.
Yes,
there's not some
the goal is the
holistic score. Dream of like.
This is what you got. What do you want to get?
Yes, it is a game. How many points do you want? Like they even respond well to taking two classes who get similar scores and having them compete against each other, or having two like at the elementary level, having the third grades compete against each other, or the fourth grades compete against the fifth grades. Like, these kids are game focused. They need competition. They need something to drive them, and it needs to be very concrete.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to talk about in that, under that concept of like color coding your learning or whatever?
That's going to get almost all of them. If you're just very explicit. And people, this is the problem, is like teachers are told like you need to write a purpose statement. And then the purpose statement is not for kids. The purpose statement is something like, well, I have to have a high Bloom's taxonomy word. Like, we will analyze our ability to name a content, our ability to understand the blah, blah, blah score of music. No.
Yeah, sorry, I fell asleep there. You said Bloom's taxonomy, and I stopped paying attention.
Like, my purpose statements are extremely direct. Today, we're going to learn how to do the first part of the assessment. Like, very, very direct. They need to see the goal at all times, and the goal has to be something super concrete. It's like why they like basketball. It's hoop, put the ball in the hoop, try and prevent the other team from putting the ball in their hoop. Like, the learning has to be that clear.
Do you make an effort to distinguish between like learning it well enough to pass the assessment or like mastering it? Like, I was thinking of like a math example of like, okay, now we're going to learn to apply the long division algorithm.
I assume every kid is shooting for accelerated plus.
Which means mastery?
Beyond mastery.
There's no such thing as beyond mastery?
From the kid's perspective, there's beyond mastery. They want to be the best. My goal is for every kid to visualize themselves as the best.
That's what mastery means, though.
Okay, fine. Mastery.
What is beyond mastery? Tell me something from the entire world of your experience that it would qualify as beyond mastery.
Okay, so I might have a standard of what I'm supposed to teach. We'll take a kindergarten example. Counting up to 10. Okay? I want to go beyond mastery. I want to get them counting all the way up to 20. Like, I want to put that in their face, even though really maybe that's the next unit. so that those kids who can already count to 10 still have a goal. If I have kids can already count to 20, then I want a goal beyond 20. And then I want to assume that's all where we're headed, but then I'm constantly pointing out to the kids who can only count to 5, our goal is to get to 6 to 10. Like, you let them know where's their next foot going to land.
Okay, so beyond mastery, and what you're saying is just mastery of the next thing after that.
Yes, that could be teaching the next course's content. That could be teaching the next unit's content. Like, I have to make sure that we look, in order to get all kids to meeting the standard, I have to have them making goals for themselves that are beyond the standard.
I get that, I guess.
Okay.
Day to day, as you're running the classroom, now that you've done the pre-assessment with the kids that thought their classes were a little bit fuller than they actually were.
Yes, and I use brutal honesty.
You help set their goals. You say, hey, you got this. What do you want? Okay, here's the things you didn't know. Here's the things we're going to teach.
Yep.
What do you do day to day to A, keep them engaged, and B, deal with their behavior slips?
Okay. Most of these kids are going to respond to a brutal, honest reality check that is then used to have them goal set and have their keep their goals very concrete and have some sort of way that they can see measurable gains. In some cases, they need it every single day. But then there are going to be those kids that it doesn't matter what you showed them. They still think, particularly if you're doing what we already talked about and you now have like a group of 2 or 3 kids who are off on the corner, like learning the content that they were missing, and now they're assessing early and they're moving into the anchor activity. These kids are going to want to be doing that too. And
we've talked a little bit about anchor activities before, but let's touch on that right now a little bit.
Okay.
What do you mean by anchor activity, and why do the kids want it?
An anchor activity is that which allows students to apply the learning. In a traditional classroom, it tended to be done before the post-assessment was done. I think most experts would tell you that the post-assessment should occur before the anchor activity.
Why would you ever do it? Why would you ever do the anchor activity before the assessment?
Right. Like, you might get a higher score if kids do the anchor activity before the assessment. But so like technically what you're supposed to do, what the books tell you to do, is that you do some sort of pre-assessing, then you do formative assessing along the way. And then after the learning is all done, you do a summative assessment. Well, I think that that's well and good.
We do the pre-assessment, we do worksheets, and we take the test.
No, like not worksheets. Like
or
formative
quizzes.
Assessments are, like, yeah, you could call them quizzes, sure.
And then the
They're not
summative,
quizzes,
which is that a real word?
Yes, they call them summative assessments.
Which is just like all the content from the 5 quizzes on one test.
Yeah.
Okay, that's familiar. I've done that.
Okay, so if you live in Ivory Tower world, which means that you haven't been teaching for anywhere between...
And I pray that we all do.
5 to plus years. Once you've been out of the classroom 5 years, like, I'm sorry, you have so many pairs of rose-colored glasses on, like, you can't remember the realities of teaching at all. Your advice is brilliant because you don't live the day-to-day world of, like, teaching. So the practicalities of having 170 students or 400 students or 27 third graders is that you don't have time to keep up with all that data. So here's what I do. I do my pre-assessment. Then I sort my groups and guide my teaching based on that pre-assessment data. Then I have generally one formative assessment, which really the kids self-score and self-identify to let them check to see where they're doing in the learning. that then normally causes them to say, like, I'm close to ready for the post assessment, but not quite. Or the summative assessment, but not quite. I then let them do some additional learning and practicing. We then take the post-assessment, or what some might call the summative assessment. But I treat that summative assessment like a grand formative assessment. So the kid completes because in most schools, you have to require a retake policy, right?
Sure.
So the kid takes the post-test, but when we were in school, that was like it, right? Like you couldn't retake the unit test. Yeah, now they can.
Because kids these days.
So, well, because when you think about it,
With
like
their participation ribbons and
I think it's good teaching practice.
Not having to walk uphill both ways and such.
Like I do think it's good teaching practice. And so for that reason, because we're going to do retakes, then it becomes a huge headache on the teacher. They're now teaching the next unit. They have to manage all of these retakes. It generally comes with some sort of cost or expense at the student's part. They got to document all that. They got to keep track of contacting the parents. It's like enough to cause you to scream or to say like, well, look at me with my like degree. I could go off to the private sector, work less, and make more. Here I go. And
what just happened? Something just happened. Where'd you just went a place?
Yeah. This is what causes teachers to quit.
Because of retests?
Just all, like, they don't have secretaries. Like, you're asking them to manage. Jared, how many people does your boss manage?
10.
Yeah, 10. Oh, 10. 10 well-educated adults who have degrees, who were hired.
Yeah.
Yeah, who are paid to be there, who are paid to perform, and who, if they don't, you can fire them and hire someone new. 10? Oh my God. I can't even tell you. No, absolutely not. I don't even know any special education teachers who just have 10 kids on their roster. And those kids come with enormous needs. I currently have almost 400. Most secondary teachers have 170.
Like level 3 has less than 10. I know that.
I know, but do you know what a level 3 learner needs?
They're basically the same as people I work with on my 10-person team. Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I'm sure. Anyway, totally off on a tangent. I'm going to get back. I'm turning into you. So, in order to prevent teacher burnout, move your post-assessment to before the anchor activity. Then, if a kid fails the post-assessment, you are managing all the reteaching, you're managing all of that paperwork during class hours. The rest of the kids are extending their learning through the anchor activity, which is designed to be fun and interesting and creative and have application outside the classroom. We should probably do an episode on how to just make anchor activities. But these kids, back to the whole point.
Bottom line is because like the anchor activity. And
yeah,
none
of this works unless they like the anchor activity.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
So, but these kids want to do the anchor activity early too, because some other kids are. Why aren't they as good as those other kids?
Right.
Right?
Because you hadn't learned it yet.
Right, but they're like, well, I'll learn it super fast. I can do it.
Well,
I'll just learn it super fast.
Then do it.
Yes, that's exactly what you do. So for the very small group who think that what they want to do is test early and do the anchor activity early, you're going to let them. And just the same as any of the other kids, like I tend to have kids sign behavior contracts. You're going to have them have clear expectations of what they have to manage the first day. And because you're pushing all the I shouldn't call them smart kids because they're not just your smart kids, but the really highly motivated kids just as hard, those kids won't have time to take care of this child who doesn't know as much. So if you throw them in the deep end, what will happen is that they will start to drown. And then you have to have a way to bring them back into the fold. I treat them all the same. So you want to go learn fast, you go learn fast. I take all the kids who went and learned fast and I pull them aside and I invite them. Tomorrow, would you prefer to learn whole group with everyone else? And I look at what they were supposed to get done. Either A, they didn't meet what they were supposed to get done, or they didn't meet the learning expectations of what they were supposed to get done, or B, they did, but they just want to invite themselves back in. That will cause this kid to have a natural, experience of, I tried it and I wasn't good enough. Now I got to go back.
All right. Are we ready to recap? You got any more?
That kind of manages as a group, and if it doesn't, then we probably have to look more closely at the teaching practice of what you're doing during those learning times.
All right. So this is one of, I think, many podcasts where you lie about what it's about. Because
what is it really about?
It's largely about pre-assessments and their importance. Like half of your podcast probably could be, hey, you need to do pre-assessments. But
well, I mean, most teachers are required to do pre-assessments. We just don't know how to use them or why they're important or.
Yeah, but important.
Yeah.
So it's important because we're dealing with kids that think that they're above learning in your classroom because they kind of know things and things have been easy before,
or your class doesn't matter.
Or your class doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so
this is this is right up the alley of teaching a health class. Kids will think, well, it's health. I'll just learn it quick.
Health or
fine.
art or music or English or
social studies, reading.
Well, not reading because everyone knows
English.
reading is important because it's on the tests.
Well, but once you get up to the secondary level, kids kind of respond to English differently. I'll write that paper later.
Yeah.
It's fine. I know how to write an outline. It's fine. I don't need an outline. That you'll get that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So we have too cool for school kids, which are really bad for a classroom if you don't deal with it, because they will just drag their feet the whole time and slow down the entire class in bad ways. Right?
Yes.
It's a
I'm bored. I shall make my own entertainment.
I'll make my own fun.
Yep.
And that's bad for you, the teacher.
Yes.
Kids should not be making their own fun.
No. No.
So you can identify these students using the pre-assessment.
Yep.
And from their behavior and their middle-ish to lowish scores on the pre-assessment that they don't know it as well as they think they do.
Yeah, they tend to be right in the middle.
So you're going to let them know where they stand.
Yep.
And say, hey, this is your score. And then you're going to have them set specific goals and make them concrete goals, like what score do you want on your post-assessment?
Yes.
You got a 40.
Yeah, not
what do you want?
These are not your, let's focus on what the standard says and I want to learn how to meet the standard. This is not that kid. Because they don't care.
They're very game motivated. Scores, competition, comparisons.
Yep.
So what score do you want? And they're going to say something like, I want at least a 90.
Oh, they might say a 70.
They might say a 70?
Yeah.
What do you do then? This is new stuff in the recap.
As a general truth, they don't want to come in last. So I will set a minimum score of 80%.
Otherwise,
if they set their goal as 80%, I'll say, okay, so your goal is to come in last and you're okay with that. And I wouldn't say that to the whole class because there's some kids where, dude, we're going to have a party when they get to 80%. But I'll say that to them. Brutal honesty. You're comfortable coming in last? And if they say, yeah, I say, all right. That's just, what am I going to do? And 80% is enough that they will be able to continue learning after me.
You're going to clearly connect the things that you're learning in the group class to the objectives that they needed to get on their, to move from where they were to where they wanted to be on their assessment.
Literally draw an actual line. Have an actual outline of what is on the post-assessment. And I don't mean give them the answers, but be extremely clear about what they have to know and be able to do on that assessment.
Because this is something you didn't know.
Yep.
This is what we're learning today.
Yep.
This is what you need to know to achieve the goal that you set for yourself.
Yep.
You're going to use the anchor activity, which is a post-test thing.
Yep.
That the quick learners are going to get to quickly because of quickness.
Yes.
That's what quick means. And then most of this type of kid is going to want to be a part of that group.
Yes.
And when they see other people there, it's going to motivate them more.
Correct.
And then some of them will work hard and learn so they can get there. Others will be like, God, just give me the test. I'm ready for it. Because if anyone else is, I must be too. And so what do?
You let them.
Yeah, you let them.
Yeah.
Because you're going to let them fail.
Yeah. Well, I generally only let them fail for one day.
Yeah.
Normally one day is enough for them to realize, like, whoa.
Or if not fail, struggle. Let them struggle.
I want them to feel, it is a win if they turn to me and be like, I want to be back with everyone else now.
And you'll invite them back and say, hey, here's what the results were. Do you want to come learn this thing that is the green colored topic that was still a deficiency on your pretest and now your post-test? And they'll be like, yeah.
Well, no. I'm doing this before the post-test. So, like, let's say they want to go learn with the quick learners. They're doing that just for one day.
But you said you let them take the test.
Oh, no. No, they took the pre-assessment.
Yeah.
They looked at their score. They saw that all the other kids are going to go off and do learning by themselves and take the post-test sooner. Mm-hmm. And so they will act like in day one, well, I don't want to do this learning because I'm better than this. And you'd be like, okay. And since you already formed those groups, like you're letting them go off, they're by themselves. You look to see at the end of that one day, did you meet those learning goal standards? Were you able to do it independently?
How do you do that?
What do you mean how you do that?
Do you like meditate and like achieve a shared consciousness?
No, you have them bring it up to you.
The Vulcan mind meld or like
no, you have them like bring you the work. The last couple of minutes of class.
But it's not a test.
No, it was like a clear goal set by me. Like you have to have learned this much. You have to have completed, maybe I'll have had some like Quizlet thing, or maybe I tend to have games that I play right in front of me, like formative assessments really, but I structure them like games, and I have them come up right away, and I'm like, good, let's have you do the formative assessment for today's learning.
Okay.
And then
it's not the post test, but it's
not the post test.
It's like quiz type test.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still responsible for seeing if students are able to learn independently. And so they're probably assessing over stuff that's I'm not teaching to the general classroom until maybe 3 days. And so if the kid doesn't know it, it doesn't do them any harm.
When they fall on their face on that, almost all of them are going to be like, yeah, okay, teach me.
Yes.
Huh?
Yeah, it's rare because that's like hard. That's very specific. The pre-assessment's more overview.
All right, so super recap.
Okay.
Some kids don't want to learn because they think they already know everything and they're above it.
Yes.
They're too cool for school.
Too cool.
You're going to use the pre-assessment to A, so you know who they are, and B, to let them know who they are.
Yes.
You're going to give them goals, specific goals. They're going to make their own goals.
Yes.
Because you're going to ask them, what do you want to score?
Correct.
Very game-like score. Not like, what do you want to be? No, just what do you want your score to be?
Yes.
You're going to let them fairly compare themselves to the other kids that are achieving things so they can be motivated to achieve things too.
Correct.
And you're going to let them struggle a little bit so that they can feel failure, and then you can invite them to let you teach them.
Yeah, they'll generally invite themselves back.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Johanna.
Thank you, Jared.
Joanna, do you get questions from listeners ever?
Yes, we do.
How do those listeners send you questions?
They send us an email.
Where does that email go?
teachertalk4teachers@gmail.com.
But wait, what kind of 4? How do I do 4?
All of the 4s. They can do a number 4. They can write the word FOR, or they can do FOUR, even though that one doesn't quite make sense.
Well, perfect. teachertalk4teachers@gmail.com.
Yes.
Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you, Jared.
Teacher Talk, the podcast for teachers who are lifers but still want to have a life.